The Adventure of the Blanched Soldier. The thoughts of my friend Watson, though sometimes narrow, are very persistent. For a long time he has asked me again and again to write about one of my own experiences. Maybe I encouraged him in this, since I often told him that his own stories were too simple and that he tried too much to please the public instead of focusing only on facts and details. Try it yourself, Holmes, he replied, and I must admit that after I took my pen in hand, I started to understand that a case must be told in a way that can also interest the reader. The case I am about to describe will surely do this, since it is one of the strangest events in my collection, though Watson never wrote it down in his notes. While I speak of my old friend and biographer, I would also like to say that when I bring him with me in my small investigations, it is not because of feeling or chance. The reason is that Watson has special qualities of his own, though he himself has ignored them because he praises my abilities too much. A partner who knows your thoughts and actions before you make them can be dangerous, but one who is always surprised at every new step and for whom the future is always hidden is in fact the perfect companion. In my notebook, I see that it was in January 1903, just after the end of the Boer War, that Mr. James M. Dodd came to visit me. He was a tall, healthy Briton with a red face and strong build. At that time, the good Watson who had left me for a wife, which was the only selfish thing I can remember in all our years together. So I was alone. It is my usual habit to sit with my back to the window and to place my visitors in the chair opposite me, where the light shines directly on them. Mr. James M. Dodd looked a little uncertain about how to begin our talk. I did not try to help him because his silence gave me more time to observe him. I have learned that it is useful to give clients a feeling of my power, and so I gave him some of my first conclusions. From South Africa, sir, I can see. Yes, sir, he replied with some surprise. Imperial Yeomanry, I believe. Exactly. Middlesex Corps, without a doubt. That is correct, Mr. Holmes. You are a magician. I smiled at the confused look on his face. When a gentleman with a strong and manly look enters my room with such a dark tan on his face, which the English sun could never give, and with his handkerchief in his sleeve instead of his pocket, it is not hard to place him. You wear a short beard, which shows that you were not a regular soldier. You also have the look of a man who rides. As for Middlesex, your card already told me that you are a stockbroker from Throgmorton Street. What other regiment would you join? You notice everything. I notice no more than you, but I have trained myself to pay attention to what I see. However, Mr. Dodd, it was not to talk about the science of observation that you came to me this morning. What has been happening at Tewkesbury Old Park? Mr. Holmes! My dear sir, there is no mystery. Your letter had that heading, and as you arranged this meeting in very urgent terms, it was clear that something sudden and serious had taken place. Yes, exactly, but the letter was written in the afternoon, and a lot has happened since then. If Colonel Emsworth had not thrown me out— Thrown you out? Well, that was really what it came to. Colonel Emsworth is a tough man. He was the strictest officer in the army in his time, and those were also days of rough speech. I could never have stayed with the colonel if it had not been for Godfrey. I lit my pipe and leaned back in my chair. Perhaps you will explain what you're talking about. My client smiled with mischief. I had fallen into the habit of thinking that you knew everything without being told, he said, but I will give you the facts, and I pray to God that you can tell me what they mean. I have been awake all night, trying to solve it in my mind, and the more I think, the more unbelievable it seems. When I joined the army in January 1901, just 2 years ago, young Godfrey Emsworth had joined the same squadron. He was Colonel Emsworth's only son, Emsworth, the Crimean VC, and he had the spirit of a fighter in him, so it was no surprise that he volunteered. There was no better young man in the regiment. We built a friendship, the kind of friendship that can only be made when one lives the same life and shares the same happiness and sorrow. He was my comrade. And in the army, that means a lot. We went through good times and hard times together during a year of tough fighting. Then he was shot with a bullet from an elephant gun in the battle near Diamond Hill, outside Pretoria. I received one letter from the hospital at Cape Town and one from Southampton. Since then, I have not heard a word, not a single word, Mr. Holmes, for more than 6 months, and he was my closest friend. Well, when the war ended and we all returned, I wrote to his father and asked where Godfrey was. There was no answer. I waited for a while and then I wrote again. This time I got a reply, short and unfriendly. Godfrey had gone on a trip around the world, and it was not likely that he would come back for a year. That was all. I was not satisfied, Mr. Holmes. The whole thing seemed to me very unnatural. He was a good lad, and he would not abandon a friend like that. It was not like him. Also, I knew that he was heir to a lot of money, and I also knew that he and his father did not always get along well. The old man could be a bully, and young Godfrey had too much spirit to accept it. No, I was not satisfied, and I decided that I would find out the truth. But my own affairs needed much attention after 2 years away, and so it is only this week that I have been able to look into Godfrey's case again. But now that I have started, I will give up everything else until I see it through. Mr. James M. Dodd looked like the kind of man one would rather have as a friend than as an enemy. His blue eyes were firm, and his square jaw had tightened as he spoke. "Well, what have you done?" I asked. "My first step was to go to his home, Tuxbury Old Park, near Bedford, and to see the situation with my own eyes. I wrote to the mother because I had had quite enough of the bad-tempered father, and I made a direct request. Godfrey was my close friend. I had many things to share with her about our common experiences. I would be in the area, and would there be any objection, and so on. In answer, I received a very kind reply from her, with an invitation to stay the night. That is what brought me there on Monday. Tuxbury Old Hall is very far away, 5 miles from the nearest place. There was no carriage at the station, so I had to walk while carrying my suitcase, and it was almost dark when I arrived. It is a large and wandering house, standing in the middle of a big park. I would say it was built in many different times and styles, beginning with an Elizabethan half-timbered base and ending with a Victorian porch. Inside there were wooden panels, tapestries, and faded old pictures, making it a house of shadows and secrets. There was a butler, old Ralph, who seemed to be as old as the house itself, and there was his wife, who looked even older. She had been Godfrey's nurse, and I had heard him say that he loved her almost as much as his own mother, so I felt close to her in spite of her strange look. I liked the mother also, a small, gentle woman like a white mouse. It was only the colonel himself whom I disliked. We had a quarrel right at the start, and I would have walked back to the station if I had not felt that leaving would only give him the advantage. I was taken directly into his study, and there I saw him, a huge man with a bent back, a dark skin, and a rough grey beard, sitting behind his messy desk. His red-veined nose stuck out like a vulture's beak, and 2 angry grey eyes looked at me from under his heavy eyebrows. I could now understand why Godfrey spoke so little about his father. "Well, sir," he said in a harsh voice, "I would like to know the true reason for the visit." I replied that I had already explained my reasons in the letter to his wife. Yes, yes, you said that you had known Godfrey in Africa. We have, of course, only your word for that. I have his letters to me in my pocket. Please, let me see them. He looked quickly at the two letters I gave him, and then he threw them back. Well, what then? He asked. I cared a lot for your son, Godfrey, sir. Many bonds and memories connected us. Is it not natural that I should be surprised by his sudden silence and wish to know what has happened to him? I remember, sir, that I have already written to you and told you what happened to him. He has gone on a voyage around the world. His health was weak after his time in Africa, and both his mother and I believed that he needed complete rest and change. Please, give this explanation to any other friends who may ask about him. Certainly, I replied, but perhaps you would kindly give me the name of the ship and the company he sailed with, as well as the date. I am sure that I could then send him a letter. My request seemed to both confuse and anger my host. His thick eyebrows came down over his eyes, and he tapped his fingers impatiently on the table. At last he looked up with the face of a man who has just seen his opponent make a dangerous move in chess, and who had decided how to answer it. Many people, Mr. Dodd, he said, would be offended by your damned persistence and would think that your questions had become nothing less than insolence. You must see it, sir, as the result of my true affection for your son. Exactly. I have already taken that into account, but I must ask you to stop these questions. Every family has its own secrets and reasons, which cannot always be explained to strangers, however well-meaning. My wife is eager to hear something about Godfrey's past, which you can tell her, but I must ask you to leave the present and the future alone. Such questions are useless, sir, and they put us in a delicate and difficult situation. So I reached a dead end, Mr. Holmes. There was no way to go further. I could only pretend to accept what was said, while secretly promising myself that I would never rest until I discovered my friend's fate. It was a dull evening. The three of us dined quietly in a dark, faded old room. The lady questioned me eagerly about her son, but the old man was gloomy and silent. I was so tired of it all that I made an excuse as soon as I could and went to my bedroom. It was a large, plain room on the ground floor, just as dark as the rest of the house. But after a year of sleeping in the open in South Africa, Mr. Holmes, one does not care too much about comfort. I pulled the curtains open and looked into the garden, noticing that it was a fine night with a bright half-moon. Then I sat by the roaring fire with the lamp on the table beside me and tried to distract my mind with a novel. But I was interrupted by Ralph, the old butler, who entered with a fresh supply of coal. I thought you might run out during the night, sir. The weather is bitter and these rooms are cold. He paused before leaving the room, and when I looked around I saw him standing there, facing me with a sad and longing look on his wrinkled face. Excuse me, sir, but I could not help hearing what you said about young Master Godfrey at dinner. You know, sir, that my wife was his nurse, so I may say that I am like his foster father. It is natural that we should care about him. And you say he behaved bravely, sir? There was no braver man in the regiment. He once pulled me out from under the rifles of the Boers, or perhaps I would not be here today. The old butler rubbed his thin hands together. Yes, sir, yes, that is Master Godfrey exactly. He was always brave. There is not a tree in the park, sir, that he did not climb. Nothing could stop him. He was a fine boy, and, oh, sir, he was a fine man. I jumped to my feet. Look here, I cried. You say he was. You speak as if he were dead. What is this mystery? What has happened to Godfrey Emsworth? I caught the old man by the shoulder, but he pulled away. I don't know what you mean, sir. Ask the master about young Master Godfrey. He knows. It is not my place to interfere. He was about to leave the room, but I held his arm. Listen, I said, you will answer one question before you go, even if I have to keep you here all night. Is Godfrey dead? He could not meet my eyes. He looked like a man under a spell. The words came slowly and unwillingly from his lips. It was a dreadful and unexpected answer. I wish to God he was, he cried, and breaking free from me, he rushed out of the room. You will understand, Mr. Holmes, that I returned to my chair in no very happy state of mind. The old man's words seemed to me to have only one meaning. Clearly, my poor friend had been involved in some criminal, or at least dishonourable, matter which touched the family's reputation. That hard old man had sent his son away and hidden him from the world so that no scandal would appear. Godfrey was a reckless young man. He was easily influenced by others. No doubt he had fallen into bad company and had been led to his ruin. It was a sad business, if it was really so, but even then it was my duty to find him and see if I could help him. I was thinking anxiously about it when I looked up, and there was Godfrey Emsworth standing in front of me. My client stopped speaking for a moment, deeply moved. Please go on, I said. Your case shows some very unusual points. He was outside the window, Mr. Holmes, with his face pressed against the glass. I have already told you that I looked out at the night. When I did so, I left the curtains partly open. His body was framed in this gap. The window reached down to the ground so I could see all of him, but it was his face that fixed my eyes. He was terribly pale. I have never seen a man so white. I think ghosts may look like that, but his eyes met mine, and they were the eyes of a living man. When he saw that I was watching him, he jumped back and disappeared into the darkness. There was something terrifying about the man, Mr. Holmes. It was not only that terrible face shining as white as cheese in the dark. It was something less clear, something secret, something guilty, something very different from the open and brave young man I had once known. It left a dreadful feeling in my mind. But when a man has been a soldier for a year or two, with the Boers as his enemy and playmate, he keeps his courage and acts quickly. Godfrey had hardly disappeared before I was at the window. There was a difficult catch, and it took me a little while before I could push it up. Then I slipped through and ran down the garden path in the direction I thought he had taken. It was a long path and the light was poor, but I thought I saw something moving ahead of me. I ran on and called his name, but it was no use. When I came to the end of the path, there were several others going off in different directions, towards the outbuildings. I stood there uncertain, and while I did so, I clearly heard the sound of a door closing. It was not behind me in the house, but in front of me, somewhere in the darkness. That was enough, Mr. Holmes, to make me sure that what I had seen was no vision. Godfrey had run away from me and had closed the door behind him. Of that I was certain. There was nothing more I could do, and I passed an uneasy night, turning the matter over in my mind and trying to build some theory that would explain the facts. The next day I found the colonel a little more friendly, and when his wife said that there were some interesting places in the neighborhood, it gave me the chance to ask if staying one more night would trouble them. The old man agreed rather unwillingly, but this gave me a whole day in which to make my observations. I was already sure that Godfrey was hiding somewhere nearby, but where and why were still my questions I had to answer. The house was so big and spread out that a whole regiment could have been hidden inside without anyone knowing. If the secret was there, it was very difficult for me to find it. But the door I had heard closing was certainly not inside the house. I had to search the garden and see what I could discover. There was no difficulty because the old people were busy with their own affairs and left me alone. There were several small outbuildings, but at the far end of the garden there was a separate building of some size, large enough for a garden or gamekeeper to live in. Could this be the place where the sound of the closing door had come from? I walked toward it in a casual way, as if I were only wandering around the grounds. As I did, a small active bearded man in a black coat and bowler hat, not at all like a gardener, came out of the door. To my surprise, he locked it behind him and put the key into his pocket. Then he looked at me with some surprise on his face. "Are you a visitor here?" he asked. I explained that I was, and that I was a friend of Godfrey's. What a pity that he should be away on his travels, for he would have so liked to see me, I continued. "Quite so, exactly," he said, with a rather uneasy look. "No doubt you will come again at a better time." He walked on, but when I turned I noticed that he was standing and watching me, half hidden among the laurels at the far end of the garden. I looked carefully at the little house as I passed it, but the windows were thickly covered with curtains, and it seemed to be empty. If I acted too boldly, I might spoil my chance and even be ordered to leave, for I still felt that I was being watched. So I walked back to the main house and waited for night before continuing my search. When everything was dark and silent, I slipped out of my window and went as quietly as possible towards the mysterious lodge. I have said that the windows were covered with heavy curtains, but now I saw that they also had shutters. Still, some light was shining through one of them, so I focused my attention there. It was lucky, for the curtain was not fully closed, and there was a crack in the shutter through which I could see into the room. It looked cheerful enough, with a bright lamp and a blazing fire. Sitting opposite me was the small man I had seen in the morning. He was smoking a pipe and reading a newspaper. "What newspaper?" I asked. My client looked annoyed at my interruption. "Does it matter?" he asked. "It is very important." I really did not notice. "Perhaps you saw whether it was a large newspaper or the smaller kind that is usually a weekly." "Now that you mention it, it was not a large paper. It might have been the Spectator. However, I had little time to think about such details, because the second man was sitting with his back to the window, and I could swear that this second man was Godfrey. I could not see his face, but I knew the familiar slope of his shoulders. He was leaning on his elbow in a very sad posture, his body turned toward the fire. I was hesitating about what to do when I suddenly felt a sharp tap on my shoulder, and there stood Colonel Emsworth beside me. "This way, sir," he said in a low voice. He walked silently back to the house, and I followed him into my own bedroom. He had picked up a railway timetable in the hall. "There's a train to London at 8:30, he said. "The carriage will be at the door at 8. He was white with anger, and indeed I felt myself in such an awkward position that I could only stammer out a few broken apologies, trying to excuse myself by speaking of my worry for my friend. "The matter cannot be discussed," he said sharply. "You have made a terrible intrusion into the privacy of our family. You came here as a guest, and you have behaved as a spy. I have nothing more to say, sir, except that I never wish to see you again." At this I lost my temper, Mr. Holmes, and I spoke with some heat. "I have seen your son, and I am sure that for some reason of your own you are hiding him from the world. I do not know your purpose in cutting him off in this way, but I am certain that he is no longer acting freely. I warn you, Colonel Emsworth, that until I am sure of my friend's safety and health, I will never stop trying to reach the truth of this mystery, and I will certainly not let myself be frightened by anything you may say or do." The old man looked devilish, and I truly thought he was about to attack me. I have said that he was a thin, fierce old giant, and though I am no weak man, I might have had trouble defending myself against him. However, after a long, furious glare, he turned on his heel and left the room. As for me, I took the set train in the morning, fully intending to come straight to you and ask for your advice and help at the appointment for which I had already written. Such was the problem which my visitor set before me. As the sharp reader will already have seen, it offered few difficulties in its answer, for a very small number of choices must go to the heart of the matter. Still, simple as it was, there were points of interest and new ideas about it, which may excuse my placing it on record. I now went on, using my usual method of logical analysis, to narrow down the possible answers. The servants, I asked, how many were in the house? As far as I know, there were only the old butler and his wife. They seemed to live in a very simple way. There was no servant, then, in the separate house. None, unless the small man with the beard worked as one, but he seemed to be a rather important person. That is very interesting. Did you notice if food was taken from one house to the other? Now that you speak of it, I did see old Ralph carrying a basket along the garden path, going towards this house. At the time, I did not think about it being food. Did you ask any questions in the area? Yes, I did. I talked to the station master and also to the innkeeper in the village. I only asked if they knew anything about my old friend Godfrey Emsworth. Both of them told me that he had gone on a journey around the world. He had come home and then had almost immediately left again. The story was clearly believed by everyone. You said nothing about your doubts? Nothing. That was very wise. This matter must certainly be examined. I will return with you to Tewkesbury Old Park. Today? At the time, I was finishing the case which my friend Watson has described as the Abbey School case, where the Duke of Greyminster was very much involved. I also had an important task from the Sultan of Turkey which needed my quick attention, because serious political problems might happen if it was ignored. For this reason, it was not until the beginning of the next week, as my diary shows, that I was able to begin my journey to Bedfordshire with Mr. James M. Todd. As we drove to Euston, we picked up a serious and silent gentleman with iron grey hair, with whom I had already made the necessary plans. This is an old friend, I said to Dodd. His presence may turn out to be completely unnecessary, or it may prove to be very important. At this moment, it is not necessary to explain further. The stories written by Watson have surely taught the reader that I do not waste words or reveal my thoughts while a case is still being studied. Dodd seemed surprised, but nothing more was said, and the three of us continued our journey together. On the train, I asked Dodd one more question which I wanted our companion to hear. You say that you saw your friend's face very clearly at the window, so clearly that you are sure it was him. I have no doubt at all. His nose was pressed against the glass. The lamplight shone directly on him. Could it have been someone who only looked like him? No, no, it was truly him. But you say he was different. Only in color. His face was... how can I describe it? It was as white as the belly of a fish. It looked bleached. Was it pale in every part? I think not. It was his forehead that I saw so clearly when it was pressed against the window. Did you call out to him? I was too shocked and horrified at first. Then I chased him, as I already told you, but I did not succeed. My case was almost finished, and only one small detail remained. After a long drive, we reached the strange old spread-out house my client had described, and Ralph, the elderly butler, opened the door. I had booked the carriage for the day, and told my old friend to stay in it unless we called him. Ralph, a small, wrinkled man, wore the usual black coat and grey mixed trousers, with one odd difference. He had brown leather gloves, which, when he saw us, he quickly took off and put on the hall table as we went in. As Watson may have noted, my senses are unusually sharp, and I noticed a faint but strong smell in the hall. It seemed to come from the table. I turned, put my hat there, knocked it off, bent to pick it up, and managed to get my nose within a foot of the gloves. Yes, the strange tar-like smell was certainly coming from them. I went into the study with my investigation finished. How sad that I must show my evidence so plainly when I tell my own story. By keeping such links hidden, Watson could make his endings seem more impressive. Colonel Emsworth was not in his room, but he came quickly after Ralph's message. We heard his fast, heavy step in the corridor. The door was thrown open and he rushed in with his beard bristling and his face twisted, as fierce an old man as I have ever seen. He held our cards in his hand, tore them up, and stamped on the pieces. Have I not told you, you terrible busybody, that you are not welcome here? Never dare to show your cursed face here again. If you come in without my permission, I shall be within my rights to use force. I will shoot you, sir. By God I will. As for you, sir, he turned to me, I give the same warning. I know your law-born trade, but you must take your supposed skills elsewhere. There is no place for them here. I cannot leave here, said my client firmly, until I hear from Godfrey himself that he is not being kept against his will. Our unwilling host rang the bell. Ralph, he said, telephone down to the county police and ask the inspector to send up 2 police officers. Tell him there are burglars in the house. One moment, I said. You must know, Mr. Dodd, that Colonel Emsworth is within his rights, and that we have no legal standing in his house. On the other hand, he should understand that your action is done only because you are worried about his son. I hope that if I am allowed 5 minutes to speak with Colonel Emsworth, I could probably change his mind about this. I am not so easily changed, said the old soldier. Ralph, do what I told you. What on earth are you waiting for? Call the police. Nothing of that kind, I said, standing with my back against the door. Any police action would cause the very disaster you fear. I took out my notebook and wrote 1 word on a loose page. That, I said as I handed it to Colonel Emsworth, is the reason we are here. He looked at the word with a face that showed nothing but surprise. How do you know? He cried, sitting down hard in his chair. It is my job to know things. That is my profession. He sat thinking, his thin hand pulling at his rough beard. Then he made a movement of acceptance. Well, if you want to see Godfrey, you shall. It is not my choice, but you have left me no other way. Ralph, tell Mr. Godfrey and Mr. Kent that we will be with them in 5 minutes. After that time, we walked down the garden path and stopped in front of the secret house at the end. A small bearded man was standing at the door, looking very surprised. I cannot help it, Mr. Kent. We have no choice. Can Mr. Godfrey see us? Yes, he is waiting inside. He turned and led us into a large, simply furnished front room. A man was standing with his back to the fire, and when my client saw him, he rushed forward with his hand stretched out. Why, Godfrey, old friend, this is wonderful. But the other man moved his hand to stop him. Don't touch me, Jimmy. Stay back. Yes, you may well stare. I don't quite look like the proud Lance Corporal Emsworth of B Squadron now, do I? His look was truly unusual. It was clear that he had once been a handsome man, with well-shaped features and skin darkened by the African sun. But across this darker color were strange white spots which had bleached parts of his skin. That is why I don't welcome visitors, he said. I don't mind you, Jimmy, but I could have done without your friend. I suppose there's some good reason for him being here, but it puts me at a disadvantage. I wanted to be certain that you were safe, Godfrey. I saw you that night when you looked into my window, and I could not rest until I had found out the truth. Old Ralph told me you were there, and I couldn't stop myself from taking a look at you. I hoped you would not see me, and I had to run back to my hiding place when I heard the window open. But what on earth is wrong? Well, it is not a long story, he said, lighting a cigarette. You remember that morning fight at Buffelsprout near Pretoria on the Eastern Railway line? You heard that I was wounded. Yes, I heard, but I never learned the details. Three of us became separated from the rest. The land was very rough, as you may recall. There was Simpson, the man we called Baldy Simpson, Anderson, and myself. We were clearing out a boer, but he hid low and managed to catch all three of us. The other two were killed. I was shot in the shoulder with an elephant bullet. Still, I held on to my horse, and he ran several miles before I fainted and fell from the saddle. When I woke up, it was evening, and I sat up, feeling very weak and sick. To my surprise, there was a house close to me, a fairly large house with a white porch and many windows. It was terribly cold. You remember the kind of numb cold that came at evening, a deadly and sickening sort of cold, very different from the fresh and healthy frost. I was frozen to the bone, and my only hope was to reach that house. I struggled to my feet and dragged myself forward, hardly aware of what I was doing. I faintly remember climbing the steps, entering a door that stood wide open, going into a large room with several beds, and falling down with relief upon one of them. It was unmade, but that did not trouble me at all. I pulled the blankets over my shaking body, and in a moment I was fast asleep. It was morning when I woke up, and it seemed to me that instead of entering a normal world, I had stepped into a terrible nightmare. The African sun came strongly through the big curtainless windows, and every detail of the large bare whitewashed dormitory stood out sharp and clear. In front of me stood a small dwarf-like man with a huge swollen head, who was talking excitedly in Dutch, waving two horrible hands which looked at me like brown sponges. Behind him stood a group of people who seemed to be highly amused by the scene, but I felt a cold fear as I looked at them. Not one of them was a normal human being. Each one was twisted, swollen, or deformed in some strange way. The laughter of these strange creatures was dreadful to hear. It seemed that none of them could speak English, but something had to be explained, for the creature with the large head was becoming wildly angry. Making noises like a wild animal, he put his deformed hands on me and began to drag me out of bed, not caring about the fresh blood flowing again from my wound. The little monster was as strong as a bull, and I don't know what might have happened to me if an older man, clearly a person of authority, had not been drawn into the room by the noise. He spoke a few harsh words in Dutch, and my attacker stepped back. Then he turned to me, staring at me with a great surprise. "How in the world did you get here?" he asked, astonished. "Wait a moment. I can see that you are exhausted, and that wounded shoulder of yours needs care. I'm a doctor, and I will soon have you bandaged. But good heavens, you are in much greater danger here than you ever were on the battlefield. You are in the leper hospital, and you have slept in a leper's bed. Do I need to tell you more, Jimmy? Because of the coming battle, all those poor people had been moved away the day before. Then, as the British advanced, they were brought back by their medical superintendent, who told me that although he believed he could not catch the disease, he would never have dared to do what I have done. He placed me in a private room, treated me kindly, and within a week I was taken to the General Hospital at Pretoria. So that is my tragedy. I kept hoping against all hope, but it was not until I returned home that the terrible marks you see on my face showed me I had not escaped. What could I do? I stayed in this lonely house. We had two servants we could fully trust. There was another house where I could live. Under the promise of secrecy, Mr. Kent, who is a surgeon, agreed to stay with me. It seemed simple enough in that way. The other choice was a dreadful one, to be shut away for life amongst strangers, with no hope of freedom. But total secrecy was needed, or even in this quiet countryside there would have been an outcry, and I would have been dragged to a terrible fate. Even you, Jimmy, even you had to be kept in ignorance. Why my father has now changed his mind, I cannot imagine. Colonel Emsworth pointed at me. This is the gentleman who forced my hand. He opened the small piece of paper on which I had written the word leprosy. I thought that if he already knew this much, it was safer that he should know everything. And that was correct, I said. Who knows? Perhaps some good may come from it. I understand that only Mr. Kent has examined the patient. May I ask, sir, if you are an expert on such illnesses, which, as I understand, are tropical or semi-tropical in nature? I have the usual knowledge of an educated medical man, he answered, a little stiffly. I have no doubt, sir, that you are well qualified, but I am sure you will agree that in such a case a second opinion is valuable. I understand that you have avoided this because you feared pressure would be put on you to send the patient into isolation. That is true, said Colonel Emsworth. I expected the situation, I explained, and I have brought with me a friend whose judgment can be completely trusted. I was once able to do him a professional service, and now he is willing to advise us as a friend rather than as a specialist. His name is Sir James Saunders. The idea of meeting Lord Roberts could not have caused more surprise and pleasure in a young officer than what I now saw on Mr. Kent's face. I shall truly be proud, he whispered. Then I will ask Sir James to come in. He is waiting in the carriage outside the door. Meanwhile, Colonel Hemsworth, perhaps we can meet in your study, where I can give the necessary explanations. And this is where I miss my Watson. By clever questions and cries of wonder, he could raise my simple art, nothing more than organized common sense, into something remarkable. When I tell my own story, I do not have that help. Yet I will now give my process of thought, just as I gave it to my small audience, which included Godfrey's mother in Colonel Emsworth's study. That method, I said, begins with the idea that when you have removed all that is impossible, then whatever is left, no matter how unlikely, must be truth. It may happen that several explanations remain, in which case one makes test after test until one of them has enough proof to be convincing. We will now use this principle for the present case. When it was first brought to me, there were three possible explanations for why this gentleman was kept apart in a small house on his father's estate. One explanation was that he was hiding after a crime. Another was that he was insane and they wished to avoid sending him to an asylum. And the last was that he had some illness which made isolation necessary. I could think of no other reasonable solutions. These, then, had to be examined and compared with each other. The crime explanation did not stand up to examination. No unsolved crime had been reported from that district. I was certain of that. If it had been a crime not yet discovered, then it would clearly have been better for the family to send him abroad rather than keep him hidden at home. I could see no reason at all for such behavior. Madness seemed more likely. The fact that there was a second person in the small house suggested a keeper. The fact that he locked the door when he came out supported this idea and pointed to some form of restraint. On the other hand, the restraint could not have been very strict, or the young man would not have been able to escape and come down to look at his friend. You will remember, Mr. Dodd, that I was searching for clues, asking you, for example, about the newspaper which Mr. Kent was reading. If it had been the Lancet or the British Medical Journal, it would have supported that idea. Still, it is not illegal to keep a madman in private care as long as a qualified person is present and the authorities are informed. Why then should there be such desperate secrecy? Once again, I could not make the theory agree with the facts. There was still the third possibility. and although it was rare and unlikely, everything seemed to match it. Leprosy is not uncommon in South Africa. By some strange chances, this young man might have caught it. His family would then be in a terrible situation because they would want to save him from being sent away into isolation. Great secrecy would be needed to stop rumors and to avoid interference from the authorities. A loyal doctor, if well paid, could easily be found to take care of the patient. There would be no reason why the partner should not have freedom at night. The bleaching of the skin is a common result of the disease. The case was strong, so strong that I decided to act as if it had already been proved. When I arrived here and saw that Ralph, who carried the meals, wore gloves soaked with disinfectants, my last doubts were gone. By writing a single word, sir, I showed you that your secret was known, and by writing it instead of saying it, I wished to prove to you that my discretion could be trusted. I was finishing my short analysis of the case when the door opened and the serious figure of the famous skin specialist was shown in. But for once his hard, unreadable face was softer, and there was real kindness in his eyes. He walked quickly to Colonel Emsworth and shook his hand. "It is often my duty to bring bad news, and rarely good," he said. "That makes this occasion more pleasant. It is not leprosy." "What?" "It is a clear case of pseudo-leprosy, or ichthyosis, a disease of the skin that makes it look like scales. It is ugly, stubborn, but possibly curable, and certainly not infectious. Yes, Mr. Holmes, the coincidence is a strange one, but is it truly coincidence? Might there not be hidden forces at work which we hardly understand? Can we be sure that the constant fear which this young man has surely suffered from since he believed himself exposed to infection could not produce physical effects that copy the disease he dreads? In any case, I give my professional word, but the lady has fainted. I think Mr. Kent had better stay with her until she recovers from this happy shock."